I'm Yumna Hussain, and I'm a youth advocate based in Birmingham, and I'm so delighted today to be joined with my co-host, Rob Hopkins. This is our 15th session of the summit so far, and it literally only started last week, Wednesday. It feels like it was yesterday. The session is going to be recorded, just a few bits of housekeeping, so you can turn your camera on if you want, or you can turn it off. But as presenters and as me facilitating this session, it will be really good if you guys can have your faces on so you can see. Make sure that you stay on mute so that we can hear our wonderful speakers. I hope you've all joined Vive. I'm pretty sure you guys have, which is our online space where summit participants can connect. We can keep the conversations going, and I know today's one will be particularly lively, talking about the power of creativity. The Vive link is also in the chat, so if you've not yet joined and had a look, please do. Continue to amplify and share the session on social media, including the hashtags #TogetherWeCan and #NurtureBuildAndInspire. I'm going to draw your attention to the fact that from the 23rd of May to the 28th, we've got our open summit, our open space part of the summit. And it's where we hand the summit over to you. If you have a session, if you have a workshop, if you have anything that you would want to lead as part of the summit, then there's a link that's going to be coming up in the chat. Click on it. We'd love to hear from you. So yeah, I'm going to introduce you to the team behind the scenes who are making this incredible event happen. Our event manager for the night is Rich. Rich, say hi.
Hey everybody, great to see you here.
Our tech wizard this evening is Maria. Maria, give us a wave.
Hi everyone.
Thank you. And comms and social media for us tonight is Yaz. Yaz, give us a little wave.
Hey folks.
Thank you. Rob, handing over to you.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome. So I'm Rob Hopkins, and it's my honor to be co-hosting this evening with Yumna. So Ben Okri recently wrote, "As artists, we must dedicate our lives to nothing short of redreaming society. We have to be strong dreamers. We have to ask unthinkable questions." So we're in the midst of a climate and ecological emergency. Ice caps are melting, species are going extinct every second. The cost of living has meant that people are living in insufferable conditions, and the social justice emergency where our rights to speech and protest are slowly being eroded and taken away from us. And in all of this chaos and uncertainty, grief, pain, and loss, we're expected to find stillness in the everyday. We're expected to advocate for our communities and to keep on producing poetry through protest, rebellion, speech, and most importantly, action. And these are times that demand that we reimagine everything. So what is the role of creative people in our societies, in our communities? How might we, as Tony Cade Bambara put it, make revolution irresistible? And how might we make our community activism more creative, better linked to our local artists? How might our activism better engage with and enhance and increase our effectiveness in acting in response to the challenges of these times? The act of imagination, especially in this current socio-political climate, is a form of resistance which has the power to change mindsets and hearts, and in turn to change the world. So I'm so excited about this session and the brilliant guests that we have here. So Yumna, back to you.
Thank you, Rob. That was wonderful. Yeah, this is going to be a great discussion, and we're going to be hearing from 4 amazing guests. And our request to each of them is to reflect in their own way on our framing statement. Together we can harness the power of creativity. As communities, how can we do that? And what can creativity bring to our work to tackle the great challenges, like Rob already talked about, of our times? We're going to be hearing from them, and then we've got an activity we'd like you to take part in. So our first speaker is Chloe. Chloe Aldrete is a mother of 2 boys living in Bristol. For the last 20 years, she's been a theatre producer, working for the National Theatre, Bristol Old Vic, Oxford Playhouse, and currently the Birmingham Rep, which is literally like 10 minutes away from me, as well as in the commercial West End, whilst managing varying levels of existential anxiety about the state of our planet. Over the last 3 years, she's redressed this imbalance by combining theatre, with climate activism, working with Extinction Rebellion Bristol, XR Bristol Families, the Bristol-based campaign Our Air, Our City, and Culture Declares Emergency Southwest. Those are, a multitude of brilliant campaigns that Chloe's currently working on. Chloe, I'd love to pass the mic over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Emna, and I'm so pleased to be here with you all this evening as this gorgeous Bristol sunset shines brightly in my face. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the personal journey that I've been on over the last 3 years, from being a concerned citizen to becoming a law-breaking activist, and how that's both informed and been informed by my job as an arts professional. So I've worked in theatre for 20 years. As a theatre producer, basically my job is to project manage theatre shows, and I deal with all the fun stuff like contracts and budgets. So whilst I work really closely with theatre artists, it's not really a creative role. It's the kind of practical job that no one notices when you're doing it well, and where everyone looks directly at you when things go wrong. I feel incredibly grateful to do something professionally which I would choose to do personally. And I am who I am, personally and politically, because of the stories that I've experienced in the theatre. They have unquestionably made me a better person. And I think theatre is the most amazing art form for 2 reasons. Firstly, because it is the art form of the imagination. And secondly, because it is a collective experience. When theatre works, it's because the theatre makers have invited the audience to imagine with them, and the audience has accepted that invitation. We co-create theatre, which means it can be different every night. It's why plays survive hundreds of years and translation into different contexts. And it's why at times theatre has been considered to be a dangerous or even seditious art form in need of restrictions and bans and regulation. Theatre is about stories. And in the words of Patrick Ness, one of my favourite writers, stories are the wildest things of all. Stories can make us feel before we think. They can change our hearts in a heartbeat. They allow us to pivot perspective and to experience things that are outside the scope of our lives, to connect our view of the world with that of someone completely different from us. And that ability to connect, to change us from the inside out and to make us empathise with each other is, in our increasingly fractured and disconnected world, radical. And necessary, because right now we need connection more than ever. And of course, stories can be hugely impactful through books and films and TV, as well as the theatre. But the different thing about theatre is that co-creation, that shared experience that we have of being told a story in community with others and of feeling others' responses alongside our own. For the last 13 years, I've also been a mother. There is no more future-gazing act that anyone can do than deciding to have or not have a child. As I held my first son in my arms, I found the concerns of my 15-year-old self hit me full force again. I remembered how scared I'd been to learn about the rate of deforestation in the Amazon, and how I'd used to comfort myself that the problems and their solutions were so obvious that surely the grown-ups would be on it. But here I was, realising that I was now the grown-up, and another 15 years had passed in which those in charge had done absolutely nothing but accelerate the problem. So, I washed my boys' nappies, I refilled their shampoo bottles, but basically I got on with the entirely engrossing business of bringing up 2 small humans and tried not to think too deeply about it most of the time. Until, in early 2019, I was standing in the shower on a sunny morning and I had a vision, a waking nightmare. It was driven by the awful news headlines I'd been half reading and half avoiding for nearly 10 years. It grew from all the stories of apocalypse I'd read and watched. It was underpinned by a sense that I had no right to expect to be spared the unspeakable horrors that humans have always brought on themselves. Basically, I imagined a dilemma where I had to make the most awful decision that a mother might ever have to face. And I'm sure that all of you will, you will have your own version of this deep in your hearts. If you've seen the film Downfall, you'll know the kind of thing I'm talking about. I was very scared, very upset, and felt very alone. Fast forward to June 2019 in Devon, where I was on a professional development course with the hilarious title Producer Farm. I was still quietly reeling from the impact of this imagining I'd had. And I'd been dabbling around the edges of my lifestyle for a while, refilling not just shampoo, but most of my dry goods from a local refill shop, making eco-bricks from waste plastic, things that made me feel marginally better in the moment, but nothing which helped me outrun my fear. Then this nice chap from the Transition Network came to talk about his book, From What Is to What If, and it was a revelation, the wonderful idea that if we could imagine awful things happening, then we could also imagine wonderful things happening. Rob Hopkins, for indeed it was he, also had a vision, but his was one where we got things right, where small buds of transition grew into beautiful blooming movements of people all building the future they wanted to live in. And his big idea was that we needed to create this future imaginatively, with inspiring stories, transformative works of art and play. And I thought, right, I'm ready. Tell me more. So for the last 3 years, I've also called myself an activist. My terrible vision is the engine that drives me, and as an activist, I can just about outrun it. Among the many things I never thought I would do, and which I would have shied away from professionally or deferred to an artist, I have facilitated meetings and co-authored a clean air campaign. I've anchored a 2-hour live-streamed action from a proper TV studio complete with video wall. I've emceed 90 minutes of speeches against the Police Crime Courts and Sentencing Bill and steered a Kill the Bill march peacefully around Bristol city centre. I've spoken at rallies against Bristol's airport expansion and at Fridays for Future events. I've written and delivered a 30-minute talk to my neighbours, friends and family and colleagues. I've been interviewed on the radio. I've taken part in several major actions in London, which have required what can only be described as theatrical levels of subterfuge. And I've been arrested 4 times. And everything in my cultural education tells me I'm doing the right thing. The stories we tell each other, in theatre, on TV, in film and books, are about the people who step up, who speak out, who fight for the things that they love, and who don't obey the rules when they believe the rules to be wrong. We don't tell stories about the people who stay at home afraid. We tell stories of beautiful transformation, of possibility. As I feel my own edges expanding in ways that I would never have believed possible through this activism, I repeatedly ask myself if I can still justify spending the majority of my time making shows, when really all I should be doing is mobilising against the climate and ecological emergency. And the answer I keep coming back to is just yes. Because I know I have to keep providing those opportunities for people to express themselves and be inspired by the best and most radiant parts of humanity, whether those stories are explicitly about climate change or not. If theatre has made me a better person, then this gift demands something of me in return. It demands that I stand up for that shared humanity and continue to advocate for it in the best way that I know how, even when I'm presented with the worst that we humans can muster: the selfishness, the ignorance, the greed and the cruelty. Connection and mutual understanding is the only way to bring us together, and my art form does that. Like many activists, I've found the last couple of weeks extremely difficult. It's been hard to hold on to your optimism and to keep fighting in the face of hideous laws being passed, friends being held in prison, and the worst kind of climate headlines. But there was a stellar piece of advice in one of my group chats, which brought me back to the conversation that I had with Rob in Devon in 2019. Someone said, "Are you spending as much time visioning the world you want to see and trying to build it as you are fighting against the world that we are in?" And I think that's why we're all here. We're here to support each other in building the world that we want to live in. So in order to have a chance to reach that world, we have to nurture the stories that inspire and connect us and foster the power of our imaginations. I'm still frequently afraid, but I'm no longer alone, because I stand now with a beautiful community of people who know that together we can do better, be better, and change the story. And I'm actively engaged in creating that new story. This moment requires from us everything that we have, and I've discovered that I had so much more to give than I thought. And together, I truly believe that we're creating an irresistible movement which balances joy with grief, action with care, and in which we earn the right to hope for a better future. Thank you.
Wow, Hannah, thank you so. Chloe, thank you so much for kicking us off with such a beautiful, heartfelt sharing. Thank you, really deeply appreciated. And your cat, I think, has also become an internet sensation over the last few minutes as well. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. So what a great start. Our next guest is the brilliant Hannah Peel. So Hannah is a Northern Irish artist, composer, producer and broadcaster. Her solo record career includes the shortlisted 2021 Mercury Prize electronic album Fur Wave. There we go. 2016's Awake But Always Dreaming, which became an ode to her grandmother's mind as she lived with dementia. The space-themed Mary Cassio Journey to Cassiopeia, scored for synthesizers and a 30-piece colliery brass band. Following her Emmy-nominated score for Game of Thrones, The Last Watch, she's currently composing the music for Sky TV's 7-part series The Midwich Cuckoos, and has just released a new album called The Unfolding, there we go, with Para Orchestra, and she's a regular presenter on BBC Radio 3 show Night Tracks. She also wrote the most beautiful piece of music about going to the moon that anyone has ever created, which I really recommend. Hannah, we'd love to hear your thoughts on our question this evening. Over to you. The next 10 minutes is entirely yours. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Rob, and hello, everybody. And yeah, I don't do drugs. It kind of sounds like the trips and journeys that I go on could be induced by something else, but they're completely not. I wanted to kind of talk to you today about that journey and how I find that, and how like it comes in different moments. It's not just, you know, we struggle with the idea of sometimes what is creativity, and how do we kind of magic it up, and how do you harness something that when it begins doesn't feel tangible. Because I think that creativity lives in everybody, whether you think you have it or not. Nothing is entirely original. Artists steal from places you just wouldn't expect, and that's all really. Anywhere that resonates with inspirations or fuels the imaginations, as long as it kind of touches your soul, you seem to be able to kind of magic it up. Old films, new films, music, books, paintings, photographs, poems, dreams, random conversations, architecture, bridges, street signs, trees, clouds, bodies of water. The key is to select only things that speak directly to your soul. And if you do this, then the creative output will be authentic. There's a wonderful Jean-Luc Godard quote that says, "It's not where you take things from, it's where you take them to." And I think this takes courage. It's about having the courage to see that creativity through, because at the end of the day, it can be quite impish. It can slip through your fingers when you're not expecting it, or when you are blocked, or you put up a wall to it. And sometimes the way to harness an idea is through kindness and embracing its nuances, molding its way to ease it into your world. This doesn't mean that I am successful in finding ways to connect with it every time. It is much more fruitful when you treat it like nature, like follow an instinct, trust an instinct. Don't force it into something it is not. And that can take minutes, or it can take a long, long time. Sometimes it can be found in those quiet moments, not in your face. Sometimes it's a journey that you emotionally need to go on. Sometimes it is right in front of you. It can also be in the ordinary things, a chair, watching the trees in the wind, a bee kissing a flower, a petal falling from a rose, the light flickering as we sit still. And from recently releasing a record that began life as an exploration into the question of, do rocks sing? Which started 4 years ago, literally as a pile of rocks, a pile of ideas, to an exploration into what is underneath our feet and how that relates to us and the earth. This record came out last month. It's with the Para Orchestra, who are based in Bristol. A wonderful orchestra that integrates disabled and non-disabled musicians, a representation of the true diversity and yet completely just about the music at the same time. I highly recommend going to see them if you ever can. Their energy on stage is infectious, and yet they remain grounded in their persona, like as individuals. They're incredible. You know, you have a soprano that uses Braille, but then in the end of the day, she completely memorizes every single thing that she's hearing. But one of those things that came from those sessions, I ended up doing some research and development days with them in Bristol. This was back in late 2018 and early 2019, where I brought that question to them: do rocks sing? And, you know, we posed those questions and found, like, why would you even think about that question? Where does it come from? Is this an exploration into where we are from? Do certain rocks affect the aesthetic of where we live, different villages? What is the sound of rocks? Like, why even bother? And I was reading an amazing book, Robert Macfarlane's Underland. If you've ever read it, it's an incredible exploration into the world underneath our feet. And he starts with this paragraph that says, "Look up on a cloudless night and you might see the light from a star thousands, trillions miles away, or pick out the craters left by asteroid strikes on the moon's face. Look down and your sight stops at topsoil, tarmac, tow." And I just thought it was a really beautiful way of placing us in the earth and in this time and this place, and how to take an idea that comes from the earth and make that into a cathedral for different voices, unique individuals, a community, an audience, then to hear the music at the end of the day. There is a lovely John Lennon quote that says, "The more real you get, the more unreal the world gets." And I think for me, that really came to play when I was doing the Awake But Always Dreaming album, which was released in 2016, which Rob mentioned. I was really struggling with the idea of losing my grandmother to dementia over the years, and I didn't know how to connect with her. And so I'd read very briefly, this is kind of 2014, when nobody was really talking about the power of music and how that works with Alzheimer's. And so I went one Christmas, we went to her, and she couldn't remember, you know, who we were or who my grandfather was or who my father was, and sang Christmas carols. And she went from a state of where we thought we had lost her to opening her eyes and singing the words and connecting with us again. And it was that moment that I discovered that the level of what is happening in the brain and the science and what is real could connect to the unreal. It felt like a magical moment. And that was a life-changing moment, that connection, that want to communicate and connect with other people to see if they had experienced that. Not to be afraid, take that courage, use it and harness it and have conversations and not be afraid of the emotional impact that it brings. And for me, that record was life-changing because it meant that there was a community, there was people around me that I was able to talk to, I was able to explore ideas, and the music itself was full of hope. It came from a place that was almost dreamlike, like as if I was living through her memories, imagining what she was going through, but also hope in that all was not lost. She was still there, and it was possible to communicate with her. I wanted to there was a really lovely song the other day that I was listening to, and I just wanted to kind of end with some of the lyrics that came from it. It's a song titled "Song for Ordure." It's on a 2020 album from Yorkston, Thorn and Kahn. And the lyrics were, "Love makes diamonds from coal. As it takes, so it gives. Love makes diamonds from coal and is the heart of all that is. And I think that's a wonderful way to say that creativity does not end. It keeps on going, it keeps on burning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. I absolutely love that, and just reinforcing that, you know, creativity really does live in everyone. And I love when you said it's not where you take things from, it's where you take them to. And so yeah, that's like it's just a piece of hope and optimism there, which I really like. So thank you so much for sharing. We're going to have our third contributor come up, who is Amina Etik. Amina is a Yemeni Scouse poet, a performance artist, a creative practitioner, an award-winning community activist. She is a BBC Words First finalist of 2019. She's a Young Associate and Anti-Racism Group member for Curious Minds, as well as an Artist Fellow of Dada Fest. She's currently working in collaboration with 20 Stories High, which is a new public arts project working closely with Muslim young people in Liverpool, titled Poet's Gift. Her new work, Broken Biscuits, explores her grandmother's 1970s Yemeni British household. In 2020, she produced a short documentary called Unheard Voices, which I really urge you to check out, capturing the stories of Yemeni shopkeepers in Liverpool. She's currently working on a new online and print project, Scouse Pilgrimage, commissioned by Unity Theatre. As you can tell, Amina works at the intersection of poetry, storytelling, and her identities as a Yemeni Scouse woman. She's an absolute powerhouse who I am very, very grateful to be in the presence of and to know. Amina, how can we harness sort of the power of creativity to rapidly accelerate social transformation? I know you're going to inspire us with your words and your actions, so please take the floor.
Yeah, hello everyone, welcome, and thank you so much for the invitation today. I don't know about you guys, but I'm really inspired. But before I share part of what I think or how I feel, I think I want to dedicate it to poets that have been imprisoned, assassinated, killed, murdered, brutally oppressed because of their words. And I dedicate an opening poem to Muhammad Mahmoud Zubayri, that was assassinated around the 60s. He was a revolutionist. He wanted to see the hope of a new Yemen. And one of his quotes is, and I put it into the chat, is, "I fight injustice no matter how bright its colour or however many names it bears." And this is a poem that I wrote called Orphaned, as he was an orphan. He sat in his favourite shade on the main road to the east. This poet, black eyes, purple diamonds, full of tears and a face like revolution, broke open the shackles, passing through a Yemenite blade. To reform a callous nation is a prayer, in hell is a bitter tongue, is a home without heart is not a home. This poet meddled his finger in the sand, in a political struggle among the blind Bedouins, tribesmen, and the heartbreakers, mourning to find themselves drinking poetry from a glass. And at night he disappeared, sank in the arms of his assassin, taking the last breath in the final stanza of an open wound, inseparable of the land we share, and all is given. This poet died for love. And I write parallel radical love letters to the home the heart aches for. And this is to honour the legacy of poet and icon of revolution, Muhammad Mahmoud Zubayri. And there are many, many poets who still face this kind of persecution, as well as journalists, artists, activists. So I start from privilege to a point where I say, you know, the fact that I can write and perform and be an activist is also a privilege in some cases. So I start here because it makes me feel uncomfortable. It makes me feel comfortable to start sharing parts of my story. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. And what you're going to do is you're going to hear a campaign video that I worked on with the Anthony Walker Foundation. So Anthony Walker was murdered at a bus stop. Anthony Walker Foundation has had a massive impact on my activism. So I share the video.
My school bus stop is hide and seek behind the glass shield. We race to the school gate, sucking on sour lollipops with our mouths inked and blue. The attendance officer marks us late. It was a promise we made to the girls to leave no one behind. This playground is war turned cold, and the hijab tightened itself. I told my mother, I need running shoes. She said, what for? I said, I need legs that can run faster, because I carried my heart to the thump of his feet growing louder on the double-decker stairs. He stood tall, chanting Bin Laden headlines and curry smell. And I sat small, hiding behind the Metro newspaper in a story that looked like mine. I stuck out my foreign tongue. The passengers pulled sad faces, hugging the predator with his fist in my face. A bystander choked on his privilege. Called in the police, I was saved, shackled to the prison gates. They held my narrative hostage. But I grew a lioness in my scars, due to my foreign face, and assalamu alaikum to my predators. You grew into the characters in the stories I write. My pen is my sword. My voice is to speak out. My rights are to claim, to stop hate. My school bus stop is not for my sisters to relive.
Thank you. So that was based on a true story. Thank you. So I was asked to write something around hate. So about 12 years ago, I was physically assaulted at a bus stop. I was 15 at the time, doing my GCSEs. It was a public member, and in turn of the events, I was arrested and received a 3-year criminal record for defending myself. At 16 years of age, I was told by police officers that I would have a 3-year criminal record and I wouldn't find a job ever again. And that really crushed my 15-year-old ambitions. So I picked up a camera and I started doing photography. I started doing rallies, I started being active. I never used to talk about racism. It was just I wanted to do things for others. At 17, I started my career as a poet. 10 years today, well, 10 years this month, it's been an exciting journey to be able to still be a creator, to still be an activist. Even though it comes from a lived experience, that still shakes me. It comes from a place of why art is important and why creativity needs to be harnessed. And it comes from a place of to be able to say 10 years later, to be able to create art, not just for yourself, for others, is an incredible achievement, not just for myself, but also for my peers and all the speakers here today who have used art to do that. So in turn of that, which I'm really, really, really proud to say, is that I've been working on a project called Poet's Gift, and I wanted to give back to bus stops. Bus stops are places for people for shelter, for the rain, where, you know, it's a working class sentiment where people gather. But for a lot of Muslim girls at the time, it was a place for hide and seek, and it was a place to protect ourselves. So to be able to do a project now that's going to do the opposite. So I'm going to share my screen again, multitasking. Okay, so this is the project, and this is basically a new project that's going to give a platform to young Muslim people in Liverpool. And we've been doing workshops. Well, we've just finished off 6 workshops working with Muslim young people across Merseyside to really talk about their identity and who they are. And in that, with their work being presented at a bus stop. And we finished the graphic design of it, and I'm really excited. One of them is actually the outline of a hijab, which was a dedication to that story, but also many Muslim women who are still facing oppression for wearing the hijab. Yeah, and I just feel like for me, moving forward as an artist is really about claiming space. Bus stops are no longer a place of threat for me. Bus stops are a place where we're going to put poetry all across the city, and that is the ambition. Not just for my story, but also for the Anthony Walker who was murdered at a bus stop too, but also for many people who are attacked in public places. Because this is where people are now feeling really unsafe. So this in result, I want to just end with just one last thing. Hopefully that's okay. Is that okay? Am I okay on time? So how do we celebrate that? So some people might use lived experience and use art to really manifest what that is. But my question for me is, how do I look after myself in that process? Where do we get a chance to heal? Why is it every time I tell this story, my hands are still shaking and I'm still, because I don't want anyone to pity me. I'm really tough. But it's like, sometimes I feel it's about creating also art that really celebrates that. And one of my biggest, biggest humble of joy is really interviewing my grandmother. And I sat with my grandmother in a theatre, and this is my grandmother's first time in a theatre place at 83 years of age. So I said to my grandma, I want to interview you, but we're going to do it in a theatre. To take you to a place where I love, a place where I speak out loud to an audience. And I basically interviewed her about her heritage and her identity. Yeah, so I'm just going to play.
أنت الذي حلفتني وحلفتني
لما جيتي هذا البلاد كيف كان الحياة؟
لا بأس. كانت أول خوف.
ليه؟
ندري ليه كان خوف في البلد هذا.
حق الجورة النيبل.
ايرش وانجليش.
نعم.
مساكين.
معش مثل الميموري قصة ذكريات.
ايوه
تذكري.
كان جان عندي قدين. غدا قال لنا الحلبة والعصيد والفري نيس كنا. قال انا وجي عندي ناكل شبس انت. احنا كنا نشتغل في الدكان.
انت اشتغلتي؟ ليش كنتي تواقي؟
نبيع الخبز واللحم
ليش ماشي حجاب؟ وين الحجاب؟
ماشي حجابات.
ليه؟
قالوا ممنوع.
ممنوع؟
ندخل من عدن. ولا عشي حجابات. قلت هذا سرال مع الويل بعد ايام. ولا شربت جسمي.
تفكري ان اليمنيين يثقوا على حقهم الكلتشر؟
حقنا العادة.
ايوه العادة.
yeah.
ليش؟
احنا بعد بطلنا حق اليمن ولبسنا انجليش. كلوز انجليش. قاعد بتريفها صور.
ايوه بس هذا كان زمان، الحين بتلبسي يمني.
داخل.
في الصورة انت لابسة different.
yeah.
بس الحين لابسة يمني.
الحين نديتينا هنا.
Okay, I'm going to stop there and just say thank you so much for listening. I hope it gave you a scope of what art and activism looks like and what that future looks like. It also looks like, just fun sitting with your grandma with a cup of tea as well, because that's really important for visibility and representation. Yeah, so thank you.
Amina, thank you so much. That was very, very moving, and thank you so much for such open-hearted sharing of your experience as well. Thank you. So our final speaker this evening is Nigel Adams. Nigel is a co-founder of the UK record label Full-Time Hobby and Hassle Records, and has worked in the music industry for over 25 years, taking a keen interest in the environment over the years, including a course in climate science at the Royal Institute, led to an active involvement with Extinction Rebellion, including co-facilitating at XR Hackney in 2019, co-founding Music Declares and the AIM Climate Action Group. Nigel, over to you.
Hi, thanks so much for inviting me. And I don't know about everybody else, but I was so inspired by those three speakers. It's absolutely brilliant to be involved with this. Thanks so much. So brave and so inspiring. So I'm here to represent Music Declares Emergency. And as an organization, harnessing the power of creativity is at the heart of what we do. We're a group of musicians and industry professionals who joined together, originally inspired by the work of Extinction Rebellion, to put music at the heart of the conversation and action on the climate and ecological crisis. So we formed around two key aims. The first was to encourage discussion and to enable collaboration within the music industry and to create lasting sustainable change to business practice to realize a net zero industry. And the second, and probably the most pertinent to the talk today, is to use the power of music and the immense cultural power of the music industry and musicians to inform and motivate the general public to take an active part in conversations around the climate emergency and the responses to it. We've all been doing our bit individually, making changes to our businesses or lives over time, but we all felt that individual actions just weren't enough, that by joining together, we could inspire others in the industry and beyond and support each other to speak out and provide a platform for others to do so without feeling vulnerable, guilty or hypocritical. On the theme of think global, act local, we took the energy of involvement with Extinction Rebellion and we brought it close to home into the music community where we spent our daily lives and where we could be the most use. We've been providing a structure for musicians and those in the music community to speak out since our inception in 2019. And we've done this in many ways, always using our clarion call, no music on a dead planet, a simple and effective statement that speaks to the power of music and everything we'll lose from the climate crisis. We've focused on this theme across social media. We've kept a stream of activity and information to connect fans and musicians alike and provide jumping off points for anyone interested in getting deeper into climate activism or simply providing ways to start the conversation. We began with our declaration of a climate and ecological emergency, and we've had over 6,000 organisations, artists and individuals signed up. Bringing together both world-renowned designers and musicians around the No Music on a Dead Planet slogan, we've created a series of sustainable circular t-shirts to thread the theme into the fabric of the music industry. We've had banners unfurled on red carpets of key music award ceremonies and had musicians make declarations to camera to share with their fans across social media. Highlighting those musicians weaving the climate crisis into their work, like the 1975 with Greta Thunberg, Foals, Canadian artist The Weather Station, and this panel's Hannah Peel, we hope to be able to give any artist experiencing the grief inherent in the crisis the support and network not to feel alone in speaking out or developing work around the topic. We've also worked with musicians to open the door on deeper, more complex aspects of the climate crisis, including finance. It's not a sexy topic in the music world, but seemingly one of the most powerful changes an individual or business can make to address the crisis is look at where their money is spent, saved or invested. We've run panels alongside organisations like Make My Money Matter, Switch It Green, and with the support of music industry bastions like Rough Trade Stores to normalise conversations like this, getting people to consider the power of their money and the more positive ways it could be used within the framework of music and the music industry. A large focus for us going forward is in being in partnership and how we can best pool our resources to turn up the volume on the crisis conversation. For the past 2 years, we've run a week of activity under that title, connecting with Earth Day, and included magazine takeovers with heavy metal magazine Kerrang, helped launch Brian Eno's Earth Percent project, looking to channel monies from the music industry into environmental activism, and we've promoted the Resolution Song project, bringing musicians from around the world together with one song to call for peace, unity, and global collaboration to protect the planet, including versions from Annie Lennox, Katie Tunstall, Iraqi classical legend Nazir Shamar, Africa's Soweto Gospel Choir, and Harmony Chorus Bangalore. We believe that music and music lovers can play a key role in creating a better, fairer, green society for all, and we hope to keep growing our network to help do that. If anybody would like any more information on what we're up to as Music Declares Emergency, we've got a music industry climate action pack that's downloadable on our website. So if you just go to musicdeclares.net, you can download that from there. Thanks for having me on.
And while you're putting your questions into the chat box, we're going to just do the thing that we always like to do on these sessions, which is to hear how our 4 presenters have inspired and informed each other. It's always really nice to get a sense of some cross-pollination from bringing these four amazing people together and what they take away from each other. So Chloe, it would be lovely to hear from you first, maybe. What's inspired you or moved you from what you've heard from the other speakers, and what are you taking away in your creativity toolkit that maybe you didn't arrive with?
Oh, so much. It's been a real privilege to hear everybody else speak this evening. I think coming into this, I felt acutely uncomfortable at talking about myself. Professionally, my job is to make space for the artists whose work I'm facilitating. And as an activist, I'm very aware that there are spaces in which my voice is not the most important one or particularly helpful, or that I need to be mindful of the context in which I'm speaking and who else should be speaking. So it felt quite strange for me to come in and hold space and talk about myself. But I just really loved, and I'm inspired by the real grace with which both Hannah and Amina did that and spoke about their own work. And particularly just really wanted to salute the bravery of Amina in talking about her own experiences of trauma and of going, I'm going to turn this into a really beautiful piece of art, thank you very much. I thought that was absolutely amazing. And Hannah said something lovely about finding the art form which speaks to your soul, which I thought was really beautiful. I think I talked a lot about theatre and maybe a bit about film and TV and books, but of course, stories come to us in all different forms, in so many different ways, both visual and oral and spoken. So it's lovely to be reminded of that, and great to hear the work that Nigel's been doing with Music Declares, which seems like really admirably focused on what that industry can do and what it can achieve. And I think there's a huge amount from that I would like to take back into thinking about what we can do in Culture Declares Emergency, which has I think a slightly broader remit, and perhaps hasn't found it quite so easy to go, well, here's the thing that we can do that might have a real effect. So I'm taking all of that away with me.
Thank you, Chloe. Hannah, how about you?
Yeah, thank you so much, Chloe. Actually, I find your talk really inspiring, because I guess I spent a lot of my childhood and I live now back in Northern Ireland and grew up with a lot of conflict around, especially around family and members of my family, and seeing things, bombs exploding, on birthday trips to Belfast. And so sometimes I feel like I don't say I'm an activist because I've kind of, you've had to be quiet. Your family has to be quiet. There's a lot of kind of nuances and emotional turmoil that goes with that. So I've found alternative ways to be active and to present music and creativity in different ways that aren't necessarily me, standing with a banner and saying, hey, this is it. But, listening to you talk was a reminder that every single day that I do something that challenges and I question things all the time. And it was just really inspiring to hear you talk. So thank you.
Thank you. Amina.
Yeah, just want to say thank you so much. I'm truly humbled. I think one of the easiest things you can do is kind of create space for others, but when you talk about yourself, echoing what Chloe said, it can be difficult, and sometimes it makes me feel a bit self-indulgent, like am I just, especially as an activist, and it is uncomfortable. But I think one thing I learned today is, and I always learn this, just listen to everyone, is that we need each other. It's really just like a little puzzle, and sometimes it's like in a theatre space, we always forget the tech person, but really they're the most important part of the theatre. And I think today's really proven to me that, and always has, is that art comes in very different shapes and ways and directions, and the people who are working on the most fundamental, which was sustainability, making sure that things are well funded, making sure that people are paid. This is how artists and activists are able to do the jobs that they do with dignity and be able to really look after themselves, but also for those who provide others for spaces. I think we forget that within the arts and within activism, all of that takes place. There's a business model that takes place, and it's an important one. But also there's people on the front line who are the artists, who are the ones. And I think there's no power structure there. For me, it's really looking and saying, I need you, we need you, they need you. And I think moving forward, I hope that one thing I would like to see moving forward in the future is that, not that what I've gathered from the speakers as well, is that we should not allow our communities come to the art that we create. Art should come to them. And also if our communities are consulting the way that we do, then make sure that we're paying community activists, because I've seen it time and time again, bigger organizations coming into communities, really doing that consultation, that creative research, and walking away with that information. And one thing I would take away is that information is vital. And also one last final thing, behind every activist is a story and there's a human being. So we also have feelings.
Absolutely. Thank you. Nigel.
So, I run a record label, and essentially I'm a facilitator, and I aim to keep in the background. And so I'm not an artist, and it's great to hear like Hannah talking about where her inspiration comes from and how she channels that, and to speak about that with such a kind of easy grace. That's really, really inspiring. And then to hear about the bravery of Chloe's activism. I just want to hear people speak up more and more like that, because I think it's really, it really engenders a sense of positivity and can-do spirit, and kind of makes you want to get on and do things. And I think particularly in light of the crime and policing bill, we need to hear more people talking about this, and more people directing, not people being cowed or backing down. We all need that spirit. And then just fantastic to hear what Amin is talking about. And I loved the bit with your grandma, Amina. That was so lovely to be allowed a door into that relationship, and to kind of hear that. That was really, really, really inspirational. And thank you for doing that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. So do make use of the chat box. This is a rare, if not unique, opportunity to have these four extraordinary people together in one space. And I'm going to ask the first question, if I may, which is, so our last session is going to be about storytelling. So on Saturday evening, our session is about storytelling. And this idea of throughtopian storytelling. So the idea of using storytelling to tell the stories of how we got from where we are now to where we need to get to. So how do we tell the stories of how we started in 2022, and then we created the kind of future that we have to, and people call it throughtopian storytelling. So it'd be really interesting if any of you can think of any musicians, or maybe Amina, in your case, poets, who compose music, who use music to tell stories about a hopeful future, who are able to use their music, their songwriting, to bring alive and help us to imagine a more hopeful, better future. You might all just be looking completely blank at this point, but if any of you, do just put up a hand if you'd like to speak to that. Chloe.
So there's actually a piece of music that's premiering as part of Mayfest in Bristol next week, by a musician called Benji Bauer. And Benji has worked alongside the director Sally Cookson for almost 20 years. They've always made work together. Sally's a deviser, which means she goes into a rehearsal process without a written down script, but with a group of artists with whom they co-create the story. And she always works with Benji, so that sometimes they're making theatre that might have songs in it, and sometimes he's just scoring the music that plays through the whole of the piece. So they made an adaptation of I quoted it from it earlier, Patrick Ness's book A Monster Calls, and they made a theatrical adaptation of that. That's where the quote about stories being the wildest things of all comes from. And Benji took himself off to listen to yew trees in Wales for a period of time, because in the piece there's a huge yew tree that comes to life, which sort of coaches the protagonist through the loss of his mother. And he's making a piece of work independently next week, which premieres next week. It's called Terracoda, and it's a symphonic love letter to Earth. And he's working with a group of artists that he's known for years. So there's a real sort of sympathy between them as artists, and it is a piece of work that is a direct response to the climate and ecological emergency. So come back if you're in Bristol. Go and see it next week. It's on, I think, on Wednesday and Thursday nights. But yeah, I'd love to be able to come back and tell you how amazing it is, because I think it's going to be absolutely the sort of thing that you're talking about, Rob, where music genuinely kind of allows us to sort of unleash the sort of the emotions and the feelings that we have about the natural world and about what's happening.
Beautiful. Anybody else? Nigel?
Yeah, just any of the music by Sam Lee. I don't know if you know Sam Lee, but he's one of the co-founders of Music Declares, and he is just an incredible force of life. He's just involved in so many things, and he's so passionate about the natural world, and he manages to put that down. He's just written a book about the nightingale, and he also, as part of XR, he got people playing the music of the nightingale in Berkeley Square, and he just manages to take this lust for life and this power of nature and put it into his music. So I think his latest album is called Oh Wow. I'd recommend people listen to that.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Not music related, but I'm really inspired by a poet called Caleb Ferry, and I was just reading one of his poems called 13. It was about young boys that are, about an experience of stop and search by police, which really spoke to me and spoke to home with my younger brother. But one thing I really find fascinating is about how poetry can really translate into theatre, and how poets are using music, theatre to really bring that kind of like hope within their work. And Caleb does that beautifully within theatre. So it's not really music, but there's definitely a music element in it as well.
Great, thank you. Hannah, anything on that before we move on? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, it's a funny one, because like when you think of future and you think when you're writing, you sometimes don't think about writing about the future because you're kind of echoing what is happening right now, which also means that you are thinking about the future, if that makes sense. So I was thinking, who do I know that actually writes about the future? And the song that came to mind, which is really, really old now, is Massive Attack's Future Proof, which from the 100th Window album, about like how it says here that the lyrics are about how no one can predict the future, and that we should still strive to make it better. And I think that's a really great reminder of how we can't control things, but we can make the world a better place if you're keeping an open mind and an eye on what is going to be happening.
Great. So thank you very, very much to Sarah Mercer for that question. Sorry, Sarah, I forgot to name check you at the beginning of asking your question. Yumna, is there a question you want to ask?
So someone's asked the question in the chat. If every panelist could talk about the most emotionally impactful creative experience they've been part of or they've seen, which I thought was a really cool question.
Do you want to suggest someone to go first?
Yeah, I mean, anyone can go first. Hannah?
Yeah, I guess what I spoke about in the little presentation was about the with my grandmother. That was without doubt a life-changing experience, that awakening of music and developing that side of awareness in some ways. I guess one of the most kind of wonderful things working with the Power Orchestra at the moment is being able to stand on stage, and there's a sign language interpreter to the side of the stage, and during the first song or the piece on the album, she's interpreting the lyrics in kind of like hand gestures, that kind of more she's using sign language, but she's also interpreting it in a more choreographed way. And I was watching her whilst hearing this beautiful singer Victoria Aruari sing, and I just had to stop because I was like, I'm on stage and I'm going to cry. And recently it was just a really beautiful moment. It's just wonderful to hear music in that way.
Thank you for sharing. Does anyone else want to share their experience?
Yeah, I'll go. So that I've seen so many amazing things, and it's always difficult to pull out the most amazing one. But I read a play in maybe late 2019 or 2020, which is about to be produced at the Donmar this summer, and it's by a writer called Dawn King, and it's called The Trials. And this is sort of what I was thinking of when I was talking about the way that stories can just change your perspective, can flip your thinking. The idea behind this play is that there is a jury of 12 young people. The play is set at a point in the future where resources have become so scarce that juries of young people are putting the older generation on trial to work out who should be allowed to continue living, and who essentially has consumed too much and lived in too selfish a way to be allowed to continue to live. And it's the most brilliant. It's like so much of brilliant writing. It's just an absolutely fantastic idea, really, really well executed. And I read it, and then I read it again because it's something that we're going to partner with at the Birmingham Rep really recently. And I realised reading it again how much it had informed the journey that I've been on as an activist, because it had made me think, holy shit, if my children are assessing the way that I've lived at any point in their future, I want them to be able to say, she tried, she did what she knew she could, she made an effort, she tried to communicate about it, and she cut her carbon footprint down. Now, carbon footprints is a nonsense term, but essentially that's what everyone's being measured on in this play. And that idea for me was so powerful. It went straight in to my heart and changed the way that I live. And I'm really excited to see what happens when this piece is actually presented in a full professional production with a cast of 12 to 19-year-olds playing the jury. Because I'm really optimistic that it might be able to have that effect on everybody that sees it. So fingers crossed.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I would love to watch that. Does anyone else want to go? Nigel or Amina?
Yeah, I've seen lots of really moving music in a kind of commercial setting over my time, as a music fan and working in the music industry. But I have to say, probably the most powerful music I've ever experienced was during the Extinction Rebellion 2019, when in the April, when people were, saying Westminster or blocking the bridges. And the use of music to keep people's spirits up and to keep things fun and to keep things light and to just diffuse any tension and inspire people. It was just absolutely mind-blowing. It was really, really, really something that, I'll always carry with me. And it's just everybody using music in that way, whether it was just one person singing or doing it in, choirs or the use of the steel bands. It was stunning.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you guys.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think you've already gone. Or have you not? Or do you want to share something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think it's one of the hardest questions, isn't it? Because I think any creative outlet comes from these moments. I think everything in the art is borrowed. We are inspired by others and artists before us and poets before us. And this is the reason we do our work. So, but I think one book that I read that really changed my early years was probably To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. That's when I really questioned injustices. And at a very young age, at the age of 14, I really started to question that. I think it was a dull part of realization that there's no power structure, but I didn't really understand the concept as I do now. And I think Harper Lee as a writer at the time, I think very, very brave and courageous. I think an activist and a writer at the same time, even though I don't think she called herself that. But the fact that she didn't want to take any interviews for so many years, it was a kind of like, I think it was a silence moment of saying there's not much to say. You know, this book is meant to challenge us and question us. But I think the biggest thing that I've ever learned is co-collaboration. Honestly, there's a moment where when you co-collaborate and you learn from others, it's the moment when you realize this is a wow factor. And I did that with European artists in Holland and Budapest and Germany, and to be able to translate art in so many different ways within music, within theatre, just shows us that art is so accessible and so versatile. And if you want to be a unicorn, you can. And I think to be an artist, we're really way advanced when it comes to accessibility as well, and the conversations around disability. So yeah, I just feel really proud to be in this sector.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the things you're posting in the thread as well. There's some lots of links to go off and look into after this. Is there anybody who from the conversation that you had in your breakout group had a kind of an aha moment that you'd like to share? Anything where you had come in with a project you thought was going to be one thing, and now you're thinking, oh, actually, now I think of it, I'd like to do that. You can just, the raise hand, the reactions at the bottom, you can press raise hand. It'd be lovely if there was somebody who had something they'd like to share with that. Hilary.
Hi, yeah, it wasn't a single thing. It was, we had a really interesting conversation where we all described different creative ways that we've done things alongside projects. And so I was talking about how in Tooting we had a whole thing where we created giant items, and we always had a giant pea. Before the food evolved, we carried a giant pea down the road. I mean, a garden pea, not a. And we had a giant bee and a giant book and a giant this, and how that just a creative idea of having those things and it drew people's attention, and it was a sense of fun. And I was thinking we all had different things. Phil talked about these big pictures that they put up of people, and we were thinking of. I was going back to Lucy's book, and wouldn't it be great, because Lucy's book's out of print, but it would be great to have a kind of something that we could all share with each other, with those little hints and ideas that might spark you to think, what could I do alongside my project? How could a kind of quite straightforward project become, just a little creative edge to it? Would be really useful resource if we had it. And I would direct you to Lucy's book, but it's out of print. But we could create something, I'm sure, between us, which would be amazing to share.
Yes, if anybody is interested in the application of creativity at the community scale, Transition Town Tooting are extraordinary in the work that they do. Anybody else? I might be building up to asking another question then in that case. Oh yes, Maria.
Hi, it's actually Carolina talking from Maria's account.
Oh. Hi, Carolina.
Hello. Yeah, this is a topic I'm really passionate about because I posted a bit in the chat, but basically I hold singing circles for many reasons. One, because people have by and large been told that they can't sing, and they have been robbed of the tools of like expressing themselves creatively. Also because singing together heals us, and because it's a community building tool, and it literally brings, music is in all of our DNA, and it literally brings people of every color and creed and race together. And yeah, essentially, as part of the work I do is about how do we get intersectionality around these issues that we work on. I used to work only on climate, but now I'm interested in how to empower people as well in terms of politically and economically. And I know that's one of the interests of the transition movement too, to like expand, so you're not just talking, so you're connecting with other movements. And for me, part of the essence of that is community building, is bringing people of every interest together. And how do you do that? And I guess I just want to underline the point that like music and art and food are things that everybody has in common. So if you start and use those tools to attract people of every kind, then you can find out what they're interested in and make plans together to resolve the issues of interest to them, whether it's climate or poverty or mental health or whatever it is. So yeah, if anyone wants to talk about how we can create singing circles and festivals in every neighborhood and like attract people to work on all the issues of interest to us, rebuild community, because so much of, so many of the problems we face is we're so alienated from each other, especially in this country. That's a conversation I'm really inspired about and would like to have. Yeah, I can share experience on how to create singing circles in communities. That's all I want to say. I hope that's okay.
Thank you. Phil has a beautiful question that name checks the late Mark Fisher. Phil, over to you.
Thank you, Rob. I'm just trying to find the quote, actually. I'm just scrolling up now, so bear with me. Okay, so Mark Fisher talked about the slow cancellation of the future, and he says that it's been accompanied by a deflation of expectations. The question is based on the idea that in the 50s and 60s and 70s and onwards, we created music and art and film and theatre and books, and we talked a lot about the future, and then we kind of stopped talking about it for various reasons. And I'm wondering, how do we bring the topic of the future back into our work again? And obviously with the transition work we do, that is an important part of kind of the work that we're all trying to do. So I'm just wondering, as artists, how you bring that conversation back to the future again.
Ooh, who should we start with? Hannah, would you like to start us off with that one? An easy question.
Very easy question, thanks. No, it's one of those things that I read a book, and I can't remember the title of it without going downstairs to find it, about an Indian writer, and he was questioning this very same thing of like, we can, back in the day we were writing about sci-fi and we were talking about things, and we've got John Wyndham's novels that are posing questions about things that are happening with climate change, but through kind of story. And yeah, we've become kind of bland to that because the industry is different. The business behind it is different. A lot of people want to buy music and books and art and things that, and even kind of technology and gaming, it is about escapism almost to, well, that's how I feel. It's the things that sell are the things that take people to a different place quite a lot of the time. So I guess it's that finding that balance. I don't know the answer to how we bring that back into thinking. I always try and challenge things about the future and emotional kind of things, and to try and start people questioning things or thinking about ways in a different way. But yeah, that's definitely I want to actually think about. So thank you.
Thank you. Chloe.
Yeah, I think a lot about, and obviously I think about this particularly through how we do this in the theatre, but how do we grapple with the great problems of our time in a narrative form? How do we do that in the theatre without it becoming a TED talk, without it becoming a lecture? And there have been lots of attempts to do it, and it's for various reasons it's never quite been successful. I think maybe The Trials is for me one of the first times that I've seen someone tackle it absolutely head on and hopefully hit the mark. But I think it is a problem that, particularly at the moment with the aftermath of COVID and the war in Ukraine, that people don't want to think about the big problems that we've got going on around us, and there's a real unwillingness to engage. And I feel so frightened because this is the one small window that we've got left open to us, and if people just allow their attention to be diverted into other things, we're going to miss the opportunity that we've got. So I think it is something that we as artists all need to be, and as facilitators of artists all need to be grappling with. How do we corral the attention of our audiences into actually looking at the problem? And the most successful thing I think I've seen recently of doing that is this, and Rob put me onto it. I mean, half my ideas are Rob's and just passing them off as my own, and they're totally stolen. But Rob put me onto this book, The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson, which is part of this new genre of literature that seems to be calling itself cli-fi. And it's just absolutely brilliant. It's such a, I can sort of see people smiling with potentially recognition. Maybe some people have read it, but it's just, it's so brilliant because it has got this story and this human relationship sort of threaded through it that sort of arcs from the beginning to the end of the book, but it also tackles from all these different angles the problem that we've got and presents solutions, and it becomes the most optimistic read, because you just think, well, if we just did all of these little things in all of these different ways, and some of these big things as well, we'd actually stand a chance of making the change that is required. But I think, I think there's an alarming lack of political discourse going on in our society generally, in respect of how do we solve the big problems rather than just sort of getting bogged down into the very many and very real smaller problems, which I think are possibly going to run the risk of upending us. Because essentially, my perspective is all of these problems they're all connected. The root of all of them, visualize it going down to a root or coming down from something, they're all the same. And if we don't grapple with that big problem that from which everything else stems, then we're just going to fail.
Thank you. Amina.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant question, and I think it's something that a lot of cultural workers think about all the time. Art is not just about painting a building, and I mean I think that's still very important. It's not about the clouds and the rainbow, the sky is blue. It's taking all of that away, and when we take all that away, we're stripped just with human voices. And I think in any art or any activism, the voice of human beings is the essence of the work that any artist or activist does. Is because there's a voice of a human being right in that middle of that conversation. So I think for me that I like to say good practice and practice that needs to be improved. And being a freelancer over the last 10 years, I've been able to work with organisations and be able to observe what is good practice and what can be improved. And I think one thing that I've seen that has worked brilliantly is co-production. For me, the biggest issue is power structures, because allowing other people to be part of that conversation and being able to make decisions based on what that future looks like is so important. And that is asking not just younger people, but elderly people, not just asking the scientists, but also asking the poets, not just also asking, the trees, ask the animals. We use everything around us. And I think also sharing, we should be sharing more than ever now after COVID. Why don't we ever share our equipment? Now what I see a lot of things that happen locally is that one organisation uses a PR system, another organisation have it. Let's skill share, and I think these conversations are happening, and I think there's something about empowering. And it's not about what can I do for you, it's about how can we co-collaborate so we can empower each other. And being the Muslim woman, sometimes the only woman of colour in some spaces can be, oh, I can give you an opportunity, but sometimes that can be a little bit, there's a superiority, when really it should be about how can we co-collaborate so we can empower each other in that space. So when we are talking about marginalized people, it's really important that we're using the context of empowerment and not we're here to give you something. It's actually the opposite. You know, we need them more than they need us to create the art. And I think that's always really important when we're doing our research and development. Where's that information coming? How we consent and because all of that affects the future. All of it affects it. And anything that has been delayed is because of bad practice, of ethics, of a lack of morals within that practice. And it can only happen if we have these uncomfortable conversations. Yeah.
Thank you. And Nigel, any last thoughts on that?
Yeah, it might seem a bit off topic, but it's related to something one of our artists did. But it is about the future, and it's about all our futures in terms of they did an album about the subject of death, but it was about approaching death with a kind of very truthful, positive approach. And it seems to me if you can't approach death or the death of a loved one in a kind of very truthful way, how can you ever deal with something as big as the climate crisis? And it was about how our culture at the moment in this country maybe hides away from death and doesn't deal with it. And they took a really truthful kind of approach to it, and they talked to scientists and they talked to artists and they talked to philosophers, and they made like a podcast series and an album all around that and a book. And it just seemed like actually something that might seem very depressing was actually really, really positive, because it broke down a lot of the taboos and it kind of embraced the future in a really positive way. I thought that as an example of art looking at the future or specific element of the future was really, really powerful.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yumna.
Yeah, we've got a question here. That's about, actually, you know what? I'll ask my own question, which is, how do you get past a creative block, or where do you turn to for inspiration? Which I think some of the panelists already answered, but how do you get past a creative block that you have? I'll go and start off with Chloe.
That's a tricky one for me to answer, because I don't think of myself as a creative, but I suppose what I've been talking around a bit this evening is how activism has forced me into that position of thinking creatively more. I think for me the answer is probably really simple. I don't ever feel like I have to work alone. So all the conversations that I'm in, all the spaces that I'm in as an activist are collaborative spaces. And I think that's one of the enormous strengths of XR as a movement, but I'm sure there are others that work on this basis as well, is that, you know, there's always someone who kind of goes, all right, well, that's what you're thinking, or you can't think your way through that. What about this? Or, you know, there's such great collaboration and conversation between people. So I feel like even if I don't know the answer, actually, I just need to enter into a conversation and somebody will move me forward.
Yeah, I love that. Nigel.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I was just I got taken off by Rob's son Ra.
The question was, how do you get past a creative block, or where do you turn to for inspiration?
Well, again, as Chloe said, I'm not a creative, I'm a facilitator. So I tend to facilitate other people's creative process, and that tends to be standing well back and just being in the background and letting them have space and letting them have time, and not putting pressure on people, really.
Thank you. Amina?
Invest in the arts, go and see a show, buy a book. You know, I think that's the biggest way. Every time I see a show, I come home and I'm like, you know, I feel adrenaline, and I think that's the best way. Also, it's about the economy. When you buy a writer's book, you're really investing into their future work. So it does two things in one.
Amazing. Hannah?
Yeah, completely agree with Amina. Like, that is one of the most amazing and rewarding things to do. You're supporting the arts and you're also taking something from it. But I guess, like, if you haven't got the means to go to something, or you're not close by anything like that, picking up a book, picking up a magazine. For me, it's always the National Geographic. It's full of everything that kind of reminds you about nature and the world and people's stories and struggles and achievements. And there is just a wealth of things, even if it's not related to what you're looking for, it can just inspire something, which is just great. It gets you out of a headspace. Also, actually, one of the things that I use musically is these oblique strategies. I don't know if anybody's come across them, but they are Brian Eno and Peter Schmidt. But you can just pick a card and it just takes you out of your headspace. It doesn't have to be that you're thinking of something creatively. So, for example, if I'm writing something and I'm stuck and I want to choose one card, I don't know, I'll choose this one. It says, overtly resist change. But it, you know, whether you follow it or not, it just knocks you out of a headspace, and then you go, oh yeah, okay, I'll try this. It's a great tool. I think you can just buy them on eBay or online somewhere.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to slightly hack. This might be our last question, I think. I'm going to slightly hack a question that Rich put here, because you know, the big strand running through this whole summit is about community and working at a community scale and the importance of community. And often when people ask me about, you know, how do you create a community around things, I always say it's like if you want to make a new coral reef, you don't go off and kind of breed loads of coral. You just put in place something that the coral can form around. If you put the right thing in place, the coral will form around it. So it's like when they want to make a new coral reef, they just throw loads of old cars into place, and then the coral forms around that. And so a lot of the stuff that I'm involved with is about building communities, about putting something in place that people can attach onto, has lots of surface area, places where people can connect. So it'd be lovely to hear what the best examples are you've seen of how creativity and creative practice can help us to build community power. Hannah, maybe we can start with you. What's the best examples you've seen of that?
Yeah, again, I want to kind of touch on the Power Orchestra, because I think that community in itself is extremely, you know, you've got musicians that are professional standard musicians that are not involved in orchestras in a way that they could be, you know, and them coming together and being brought together as a community has kickstarted what they, you know, are saying is what an orchestra should be, which is performing in spaces that are unusual, doing works by artists that would never be performed by a normal orchestra, and it's all across the UK. And it's not only across the UK, but it's also brought other musicians from the worldwide to look at the way they're working and the positivity that they bring to a certain community that have felt sometimes on the edge of things.
Thank you. Beautiful. Amina.
Oh, okay, this is not based just on creativity. This is around, because I've got one that's quite light and one that's really heavy as an answer. I think one that is really, I think Matthew asked a question also about power structures, and a good example of that. So I'm going to merge them together, if that's okay. One organisation, and I think I need to give them credit. So I think after, you know, may he rest in peace, George Floyd, a lot of our organisations came forward in solidarity, but also people started to reflect inwards about what are they doing to tackle anti-racism within their work and how they can support their communities locally. And one organisation that I think did really well in terms of power structure was Curious Minds, which is based in the Northwest. And they basically said, we're going to hire creators, practitioners, activists to become our anti-racist advisory group. And that was quite really difficult for them, because it was uncomfortable for us to be consulting them how to change. And I didn't feel really comfortable with that, because I'm an employee as Curious Minds, as a freelancer too. So it was uncomfortable at the beginning, but an organisation that listens and wants to change ways, but for all of us. This is a change not just for a particular group of people, it's for everyone. And within a year, through the advisory group, they were able to hire their first Black woman to become the director of inclusion within the organisation. And that was part of the consultation, to be paid within the 3 months, and to be able to do that is really powerful. But just one little simple thing, as light as community and art, when COVID hit, theatres closed. And I don't know about you guys, but I was really sad not to be able to see a show. I couldn't bring myself to see a show online. It just wasn't the same. And an organisation called 20 Stories High brought theatre to our doorstep. And it was called Knock on the Door. And it was basically someone just knocked on the door 2 meters away, and it was about a cat that was missing. It was literally a 10-minute play outside your front door. And I just think to do something like that is so beautiful. And really, it made our local community smile. And also it brought theatre to communities. My dad has never gone to a theatre. But for him to experience theatre at his doorstep, so it did a lot of things. It wasn't just because of COVID and 2 meters. And now people are thinking outside the box. How can we now bring theatre and out of the space of theatre? So yeah, there's loads of things, but these are 2 examples that I've really seen, and I've shown good example.
Thank you, Chloe.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I can come up with any examples that are actually better than some of the amazing creative community projects that people were talking about in the Blizzard of Stories last week. You know, there were some absolutely amazing examples of how you do this that were just, you know, completely inspiring. But I'm also a programmer as well as a producer, which, you know, means curating a program and bringing shows into a venue. And I believe that what you put on the stage is extremely important to who that work is going to appeal to. And, you know, community engagement is very many things, and they all have to be done simultaneously. But actually, a big part of that, and the part I can control, is what goes on the stage. And when I was working at the Bristol Vic, I was there while we were celebrating the theatre becoming 250 years old. And we felt really strongly as an organisation that that day needed to be marked not by, you know, Jeremy Irons being on stage, who we had doing something in that year, but it needed to be the community that were on stage. So we held a project called Open Stage. Everyone submitted whatever it was they wanted to come and do, and we created a sort of variety show in 3 sections that ran throughout a day, where everybody came. People read poems, people sang songs, people did clowning acts, community dance groups. It was absolutely amazing. And some of that work was astonishing. Some of that work was absolutely hilariously awful, but, you know, that was part of its beauty. And what was really exciting was that there were extremely beautiful experiences of people just going, that's my daughter on the stage. I've never been here before, and that's my daughter on the stage. And that changes the way that people see that building forevermore. But we also identified, you know, absolute shining talent on that day. And what's really exciting is another show that's in Mayfest next week is the own story of a young man who came and performed on the stage on that day, and has subsequently, you know, been involved in the theatre in various ways. But he's telling his own story on that stage as part of Mayfest next week. And for me, that's really inspiring, because you bring the community in, and then from that you tell their stories, and you change the way that they see their space. And that also, in a weird way, that answers a question about decolonising power structures a little bit that was in the chat as well. So yeah, I think that's my answer to that.
Thank you. Nigel, did we hear? I can't remember now. Did we hear?
No, I don't have masses to add to that. I would just say at the school level of properly, you know, funding music at school level and giving it value. And I see on you know, in the world that I work, I see a lot of other countries who are funding music so much better, and, you know, really giving a platform for musicians to take time and develop and collaborate. And I just think, you know, I think that's something we could do so much better in our country, is kind of, you know, value it so much more.